I remember the envelope in my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped it. A thick manila packet slid under my new apartment door. My name typed cleanly on the front. I hadn't expected any paperwork. I'd only been living here 3 days. Inside, stapled and stamped, was a full lease agreement with my signature already on it. Except, it wasn't my signature. The shock made my mouth go dry. My eyes darted over the pages, line after line of legal contracts I swore I never touched. At the bottom, in neat cursive I recognized immediately, was his name. My mother's ex-husband. My ex-stepfather. The man who had hovered over every move of my life for years, even after the divorce. Somehow, he had managed to slide himself into my new beginning, this one escape I thought was finally my own. When the landlord knocked, timid, polite, curious, he asked if my stepdad had explained the adjustments on the lease. I froze. "What adjustments?" I asked. He flipped open his copy. "Well, he co-signed last week, gave us his address for billing, said you wanted him as point of contact for any emergencies." I laughed, short and bitter. Because if I didn't laugh, I'd dissolve into a scream. Why would I want that? But the landlord blinked, confused. He clearly thought this was all settled. He was very persuasive. He said you were nervous to be on your own, that you asked him to take responsibility while you find your feet. And there it was. The drip-drip of his control, always framed like he was protecting me when he was really suffocating me. Back in my mother's kitchen, he'd used that tone 100 times. Now he'd carried it into my sanctuary. My fists tightened around the contract, the paper creasing in jagged wrinkles. "This is my apartment," I said, too sharply, startling the landlord. My voice was shaking but deliberate. "I never gave him permission to appear on this lease. I am the tenant. Only me." Yet all I could see as the landlord's eyes flicked uneasily between the pages was one awful truth. On paper, in legal ink, he had bound himself into my freedom. I could taste bile in my throat as I glanced around my sparsely furnished living room. The air suddenly felt thick, contaminated. How had he gotten this far, this fast? And worse, who was going to believe me now when even my landlord was on his side? Because if this was just the beginning, I knew he had planted himself in this apartment for a reason. The question clawed at me until I couldn't breathe. If he already had my signature forged onto the lease, what else had he decided for me without my knowledge? Shall I write the next chapter? I sat on the edge of my mattress, the only piece of furniture I'd managed to drag in so far, staring at the crumpled packet on the floor. The truth was settling in like a lead weight. As much as I wanted to scream, I couldn't just walk away. This wasn't some petty intrusion I could ignore. If his name was stitched legally into my lease, he had woven control into the very roof over my head. Moving out had already drained nearly everything I had saved. Deposit, movers, first month's rent in advance. Walking away now would mean crawling back to my mother's house, where his shadow loomed anyway. I whispered it aloud in the empty room, as if saying it would make the knot untangle. He can't have this. Not again. I remembered every promise I'd made to myself while packing boxes at midnight, while driving this rattling carload of my life to the new apartment. This was supposed to be sacred. Mine. Finally mine. Yet somehow, in the space of 3 days, he had grafted himself onto it, and everyone around me, from the landlord to my own mother, seemed ready to believe his story that I wasn't capable on my own. I knew how he worked. Image was always his weapon. Polished, reliable, always the adult in the room. My mom used to beam whenever others admired how responsible he was. Meanwhile, I watched him hoard control of bank cards, vacation plans, even decide which college brochures disappeared quietly off the counter. If I questioned anything, he twisted it, made me look ungrateful, dramatic, immature. And here it was again. Even my independence rewritten in his handwriting. The financial stakes gripped me like a vice. I had no backup savings. Every check was already budgeted months ahead. This apartment wasn't just a move. It was my survival plan. If I lost it because of him, I wouldn't just lose a roof. I'd lose the fragile sense of self I'd fought years for. My mother didn't understand that. Or maybe she didn't want to. She always said, "He means well, just let him help." But help doesn't mean stealing my freedom line by line in ink. I pulled out my phone, nearly dialing my mom before I stopped. If I called her, he'd be next to her, and she'd put me on speaker, and it would be me against him again in the court of her kitchen. No, I couldn't start like that. First, I had to gather myself, figure out what his endgame was. Because this wasn't random. He wanted something. His name wasn't on that lease for nothing. I stared at the papers again, at how my fake signature curved just like mine, only a touch neater, less hurried. The sight made me queasy. The fight hadn't even begun, but I already knew. This wasn't about rent. This was about control. And if I didn't act fast, I'd end up living in a space that legally belonged more to him than to me. But here was the real question burning through my chest. How many people were going to tell me to be thankful before I could finally prove this was an invasion, not a favor? Shall I write the next chapter? The next morning, the proof of how little space I was allowed became painfully small. A note taped to my door in his handwriting. Deliberate, tidy, paternal. Read, "Maintenance inspection scheduled Monday. I already confirmed on your behalf. Don't worry, I'll be there to let them in." My guts twisted. He had no right to schedule anything in my apartment. Still, when I called the complex office, the assistant confirmed it. "Yes, your stepfather called earlier this week. Said you wanted him to handle logistics." Stepfather. They kept using that word like it was permanent. Like the divorce never dissolved anything. Not his ties, and certainly not his grip. It was a small thing on paper, wasn't it? A phone call, an inspection. But to me, it screamed louder than if he'd stormed in yelling. He was making himself indispensable by pretending I couldn't even manage a key date in my own place. And when I pushed back, I never asked him to do that. The assistant's polite pause said everything. They didn't believe me. They believed him. After all, adults don't forge their ex-stepdaughter's name, do they? Adults don't gaslight an entire rental office. Hours later, my mother texted, "He told me you're upset about the lease confusion. Don't make a big drama out of this. He's just making sure nothing falls through. You should appreciate he wants to help." Appreciate. That word was gasoline. I slammed the phone down on the counter, shaking. Of course she'd already taken his side. It was always like this. His gestures rebranded as responsible kindness. My protests framed as hysteria. One holiday, he bought me a copy of the same cheap necklace he gave to his new stepdaughter. When I pointed it out, he said I was being overly sensitive. Another time, he helped by redirecting my mail to his house without asking. Every time, my mom said, "Don't make an issue. He means well." Mini betrayal by mini betrayal. They looked harmless if you weren't the one living in them, but I was drowning in the little thefts. Keys taken, bills redirected, dates spoken for. Each one scraped at my sanity like sandpaper. Until soon, outsiders would only see the aftermath. Me furious, him gentle. Who looked more reliable that way? I sat back on the bare couch cushion, the silence of the apartment pressing on me, and realized, if I didn't find something undeniable, something he couldn't talk pretty circles around, this narrative would crush me. The small acts would just keep stacking, and everyone would keep nodding along with his story of me as the impulsive girl who needed his hand on every decision. I needed a crack in his facade, something visible, something concrete. because confronting him with words never mattered. He'd reframe mine until I doubted myself. And then, as I stared at the notes still flapping on my door, I remembered. Landlords keep call logs. Call dates, call lengths, confirmations. Paperwork. If I could trace who initiated what, I might finally prove he was puppeteering things. But getting those logs without tipping him off, that was another battle entirely. Shall I write the next chapter? I couldn't shake the image of him rehearsing his version of events, perfecting that controlled smile, the one that made him sound so reasonable, and me so irrational. If I walked straight into this battle empty-handed, I already knew the ending. He'd win again. That's why I clung to the idea of evidence. Not emotions, not my word against his. Actual proof. The leasing office was only 2 blocks away. I walked there with my stomach in knots, rehearsing what to say. I couldn't just blurt out, "My ex-stepfather's a control freak who forged my lease." They'd think I was unstable. So I forced myself to keep it calm, polite, professional. That's the cruelest irony. I had to mimic his strategy. The receptionist was flipping through forms when I walked up. "Hi. I wanted to check on something," I began cautiously. "I understand you have call logs for tenant-initiated requests. Can you confirm who scheduled my maintenance inspection?" She scrolled through her screen, lips twitching like she wasn't sure how much she should say. "Well, usually we only share details with the primary contact." My pulse spiked. Primary contact. That meant his name was right there on her screen, above mine. "Could you at least confirm," I pressed, "whether it was me or someone else?" Her hesitation gave me enough. "I can't disclose the actual name," she said gently, "but let's just say it wasn't your caller ID on file." She glanced up with a flash of sympathy before lowering her eyes again. That was all I had time to extract before I felt the blood roaring in my ears. He had called them. Not a misunderstanding. Not a shared responsibility. He had deliberately positioned himself as the voice of record for my apartment, and they were complicit, even if unintentionally, by treating him as the steady hand and me as the anxious background noise. I left the office with my fists jammed in my coat pockets, trembling. Another paper cut I couldn't stop bleeding from. But the receptionist's tone, her small, almost guilty glance, lit a fire I didn't expect. Someone outside the family had finally seen it. She couldn't spell it out, but she knew something was off. That mattered more than I realized. When I got back to my apartment, I dialed my mom despite every instinct screaming not to. She answered with the tension already sharp in her voice. "He told me you were snooping through paperwork again. Honey, when are you going to learn to stop mistrusting him?" Her words made my vision blur. Snooping. That's how he framed it? That I was sneaky, disloyal, suspicious. He had already seeded the narrative before I even called, and my mother repeated it like scripture. I swallowed hard. "Mom, you don't understand. He's on my lease. He's directing calls. This isn't about help. It's about power. I can't do this right now," she sighed, exasperated. "He's the only one making sure you don't ruin this place before you even settle in." Then the phone went dead. She had hung up on me. I dropped the phone onto the couch and sat frozen. Everywhere I turned, landlord, office, even my mother, the same wall stood. He was the voice of reason. I was the unstable one. And yet, something inside me hardened in that moment. If the phone records weren't enough to convince anyone, I'd have to dig deeper. There was a paper trail out there, somewhere, that would show what he really did. What I didn't know yet was how soon that trail would land literally at my feet, and what an ugly truth I'd find inside it. Shall I write the next chapter? 2 days later, it happened during the kind of gray morning where you almost miss small things. I heard the familiar shuffle of envelopes under my door, most of them junk flyers or late-forwarded letters. But one stood out. It was thick, official, stamped with the apartment complex's logo. Only the addressee wasn't me. It was his name, my ex-stepfather's name, printed bold, followed by unit, my number. At first I thought it had been delivered by mistake, maybe just a clerical slip. But as I pulled it inside and slid it open with my thumbnail, my stomach dropped. It wasn't junk mail. It was a utility notice confirming that as of last week, gas and electricity accounts for my unit had all been registered under his billing information. My apartment wasn't just my apartment anymore. On paper, it was branded his. The bills, the services, the lines of credit, it all ran through him. I sat on the floor with the letter in my lap, paralyzed. There it was, physical evidence sealing what I dreaded. He had rerouted ownership into his hands, not symbolically, but practically. He'd hijacked my independence neatly, efficiently, without even needing a key. And the most maddening part was, from the outside, it looked like generosity. Who else takes over bills but a parental figure making sure things don't slip? Who would dare accuse him of foul play when the excuse of help was woven in? I wanted to call the utility company immediately, demand reversal, but I could already see the obstacles. His name was now tied to the account. Utility companies don't just listen to the other name on the lease, especially when that other name looked like second priority. He hadn't just barged in. He deliberately placed me in the weaker legal position, as if this apartment was a table, and he'd calmly taken the head chair while sliding me to the side. I pressed the letter flat against the rug, bile rising in my throat. Images rushed back. Him bragging at family gatherings about being the one who keeps things running. Him telling the waiter to put it on my card, just to smirk when I reached for my wallet. Every time, it wasn't about the money. It was about being undeniable, irreplaceable. The story of the responsible man he loved starring in. Now my home was his new stage. And the worst part? I realized this wasn't even about me anymore. Not really. This was about him needing the narrative to stay intact after the divorce. My mom hadn't cut him off completely. She still let him linger. And maybe he feared that without tying himself visibly to my life, people would start asking hard questions. Wasn't it strange? An ex-stepfather lingering? Unless he painted himself as a trusted protector. A man too noble to walk away. I snapped photos of the documents before folding them back into the envelope. Cold, undeniable proof he was tightening his grip. But just as I set it on the table, my phone pinged with a new message. From him. Don't forget to send me this month's balance once the bill is due. You don't need to stress yourself with late fees. I'll handle the payments. Just focus on your job. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped the phone. He wasn't only invading my lease. He expected me to accept him as my financial gatekeeper again, like I was a child. If you think I exploded right then, you're wrong. Something colder took over. Because now I had what I needed. Written proof, documentation, timestamps. The game had shifted. The only question left was how, and when, to use it. Shall I write the next chapter? I couldn't unsee the words on that screen. Just focus on your job. Like I was his dependent, his project, his fragile child who couldn't keep the lights on without his guiding hand. My jaw ached from clenching as I stared at his message. This wasn't oversight. This wasn't generosity. It was deliberate positioning. He wanted me indebted, cornered, powerless. For hours, I scrolled back through every text, email, scrap of communication I'd kept over the years. The pattern that emerged felt like a puzzle snapping into dreadful focus. He always spoke to me as if I were someone who secretly needed him, and then he'd behave in ways that created that exact need. He made a fire, handed me a bucket of water, and demanded applause when the flames dimmed. And if I pushed back, then I became the hysterical one. But when proof landed in my lap, I realized something important. If I showed it too soon, it would vanish under his spin. He'd say I misunderstood, that he was covering an oversight. If I went to the landlord, they'd warn me about cancellation clauses and penalties. No, I needed something stronger. I needed to collapse his story altogether. That resolve hardened into action the next morning. I called the utility company directly, rehearsing calm words as though I were prepping for trial. "Yes," I said. "This is my name, tenant of address. I need to clarify something about the account holder." The man on the phone double-checked my unit. "Yes, ma'am, it's listed currently under ex-stepfather's name. He registered as the primary last week and provided an alternate contact. Are you authorized under him?" My throat almost closed, but I forced steady. "No, I'm the leaseholder. He should have no authority here." The pause that followed told me everything. "Ma'am, without a notarized release form, I'm afraid we can't just change primary billing. If you think this was done fraudulently, you would have to pursue that through legal channels." Legal channels. The words punched me between the ribs. This wasn't just family drama anymore. It was paperwork, signatures, authority. Every avenue looped back into his narrative. He held paper I didn't even know existed. I hung up, sick to my stomach. But then a thought stumbled into my mind. Fraudulently. That little word had cracked something open in my brain. Because if the utility company already smelled the irregularity, what would happen if someone above them saw the trail? Not just one letter, but a collection. The forged lease, the misrouted bills, the texts where he positioned himself as responsible. A case wasn't built out of anger. It was built out of paper. And for once, I was the one collecting it. That evening, I sat on the floor surrounded by open envelopes, screenshots printed out, the fake contract creased with my fingerprints. My sanctuary looked more like an evidence locker. I pinned each piece mentally against the long history of being rewritten. It was terrifying. The idea of escalating beyond whispers to something formal and irreversible. But I could feel it now. This was no longer just about pushing back. It was about survival. The breaking point wasn't when my mother dismissed me, or when he scheduled fake inspections. It was when the man who wasn't even married to my mother anymore managed to write himself legally into the fabric of my independence, and then dared to tell me to be grateful for it. I looked at the spread of proof and made the decision in my chest before I even admitted it out loud. Next time I saw him, I wouldn't hold back. This time, he wouldn't walk away with a polished story. This time, I'd bring the documents. But what I didn't expect was that the confrontation would come sooner than I planned, and not in the privacy of my living room. Shall I write the next chapter? It happened on a Sunday afternoon, when I was still taping receipts and letters into neat rows across my kitchen table. The knock rattled the apartment door, 3 controlled heavy raps that carried his rhythm. My chest tightened. He hadn't been invited. He never was. But that never stopped him. When I opened it only a crack, there he stood, well-pressed shirt, clipboard under one arm, the same calm smile that made everyone else relax, and me want to scream. "Inspection day," he said smoothly, holding up his copy of the lease like a badge. I reminded the complex I'd handle this. "Didn't you get the note?" I froze, bile rising. Behind him, 2 maintenance workers shifted uncomfortably, clearly caught in the middle. He had orchestrated this whole performance, arriving not alone, but with an audience to showcase how responsible he was. If I slammed the door, I'd look unhinged. If I let him in, I surrendered my space. Either way, I lost ground. "Come on," he coaxed gently, addressing me like a child refusing medicine. Don't make this difficult in front of everyone. My palms burned. This was the line he'd crossed too many times, but now others could see it. The sudden panic wasn't only fury, it was shame. He knew how to make me seem unreasonable within seconds. I forced the words out through a tight jaw. You are not on this lease. You don't live here. He tilted his head, as if indulging me. Of course your name is on it, but mine is too. It's safer this way. The landlord needed a responsible point of contact. He winked almost imperceptibly, knowing exactly how those words would land. The workers nodded politely, already convinced of which one of us was the stable adult. The humiliation boiled into my bloodstream, and for a split second I wanted to cry, to give up, to tell them fine, let him handle it. But then my eyes darted to the table behind me, the mound of papers I'd been collecting. Proof. Undeniable. The thought steadied me like a hand to the spine. Wait here, I snapped, retreating inside while he muttered, See? Emotional. Always rushing. My fingers shook as I gathered the misdelivered utility notice, the copy of the forged lease, the text printed in bold black ink. When I stepped back into the hallway, maintenance staff hovering with awkward sympathy, I held the stack like a shield. This, I said firmly, my voice rising with every word, is what he doesn't want you to see. He forged my signature. He rerouted bills. He pretended authorization he didn't have, and he's using all of it to keep control of me. For the first time, his face cracked. That polished calm slipped. That's not true, he snapped, his tone sharper, quicker, and the speed gave him away. He wasn't confused. He was caught. The two workers exchanged a glance. One murmured, maybe we should reschedule, before shuffling back toward the stairwell. And just like that, the audience he'd chosen shrank, leaving just him and me and the heap of proof in my hand. I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears. This wasn't the whole confrontation yet, not even close. But it was the first time the balance tipped, the first time other eyes glimpsed the mask slip. And deep down, I realized, if he could lose his composure here, in front of strangers, how much more brittle would he become when I forced the truth out under my mother's gaze? Shall I write the next chapter? When the maintenance crew disappeared down the hallway, the silence between us turned suffocating. He dropped the smile entirely, his eyes narrowing like a cornered animal. The clipboard pressed harder against his chest. A shield now, not a prop. You've really crossed a line, he hissed low, careful to keep the volume down so only I could hear. Waving papers around, trying to make me look like some kind of criminal? You have no idea how pathetic you just appeared. But my hands didn't tremble this time. I lifted the envelope, the utility notice with his name stamped across my apartment number. You think I'm bluffing? You've invaded my life on paper. This isn't parental guidance. It's fraud. Something dark flickered across his face. Then just as quickly he regained composure. He leaned slightly closer, his voice syrupy. Listen, you don't want to cause trouble for yourself. If you push this, you'll end up in legal tangles you can't afford. Your mother will side with me. The landlord trusts me. And honestly, look around at this place. He glanced into my half-furnished apartment, smirking. You'd collapse in a month without me. It was the same script I'd heard for years. But this time, I had documents, a trail he couldn't erase with condescension. So let's test that theory, I shot back. Tomorrow, living room, you, me, Mom. We put everything on the table. And if you lie once, I show her this stack. His eyes flared, but he covered it with a smirk. Fine. You want a showdown? Don't cry when it backfires. He turned on his heel and strode down the hallway, controlled steps echoing until the door shut behind him. I collapsed against the wall, heart hammering. Did I really just set that in motion? My mother had always treated him as the rational one, the fixer, the adult. Now I was about to present her with papers, daring her to choose between my word and the man she still let hover around her life even after divorce. That night, I couldn't eat. I lined up every page on the table like ammunition, rehearsing what to say, what not to say. It felt less like preparing for a family talk and more like trial. He had always thrived in casual battles, twisting small comments in kitchens or cars until I looked unstable. But this would force him into the light with real evidence in his face. Sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard his words. Don't cry when it backfires. That was his genius. Remind me of the possibility I was wrong, that maybe even proof wouldn't be enough, that maybe I'd still walk away the ungrateful, dramatic daughter figure. But just before dawn, a sharp clarity rose inside me. If he tried to humiliate me again in front of her, I had the documents ready. If he tried to twist it, I had timestamps. And if she still rejected it in the end, at least I wouldn't be alone in my knowledge anymore. I would know the truth belonged to me, not his performance. For the first time in years, victory didn't mean convincing her. It meant surviving the storm with myself intact. What I didn't realize, what chilled me as I packed the envelope for the next day, was that her reaction would be far more complicated than just choosing sides. Shall I write the next chapter? The next evening, when I walked into my mother's living room, the smell of lemon polish clung to everything, sharp and sterile, as if the space had been deliberately staged. He was already there, sitting in his favorite chair, as if he'd never moved out, one ankle resting neatly on his knee, a practiced calm radiating off him. My mom hovered by the window, half smiling like a hostess waiting for a storm she promised herself wouldn't come. I laid the envelope down on the coffee table between us. The weight of it seemed to tilt the whole room. Before we start with excuses, I said, my voice steadier than I expected, I want you both to look at this. I slid the utilities notice forward. His name, my unit, my proof. Her brow furrowed as she picked it up, scanning. He didn't even wait for her to finish before chuckling. This again? It's care, not crime. She can't handle bills yet, I volunteered. End of story. My mother looked up at me, her voice careful, pleading. He's just making sure you don't get overwhelmed. Why is that such a problem? That was his opening, and he ran for it, leaning forward, clasping his hands like a politician. She's anxious. Always has been. You remember the late-night calls, don't you? The bounced checks? I step in. Suddenly her lights stay on. Her landlord praises her reliability. She should be thanking me, not crucifying me. And there it was. The script. His testimony delivered smoothly, polished for her ears alone. He didn't even flinch, calling me anxious, unreliable, a perpetual child. My mom shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. I could feel the old patterns snapping into place. His authority, my desperation. But this time, I leaned in too. If that's true, then why forge my signature on the lease? I pulled out the copied contract, the too-clean version of my name beneath the clauses. I dropped it right in front of her, the pages slapping harder than I meant. Why reroute mail addressed to me into your possession? Why respond to landlords as if you own me? His face twitched. Barely, but I caught it. He hadn't expected me to bring more than one page. My mother looked between the contract and me, her cheeks draining pale. You're saying he signed for you? Her voice shook the tiniest bit. I'm not saying it. I'm showing it, I told her, pulling out the phone text printouts next. He tells me to focus on my job while he runs my bills. What is that, if not control? Silence fell so heavy the air throbbed with it. He tried to recover, rattling off. She exaggerates. You know how she gets. That signature, it's just a copy they made, probably clerical. But she cut him off, voice trembling. Did you sign her name, yes or no? The corner of his mouth flicked downward. That hesitation, seconds too long, was his betrayal. My mother set the papers down slowly, like they were sharp, and for the first time since I could remember, I saw uncertainty in her eyes, toward him, not me. My pulse hammered. Finally, the stage had cracked. Yet even as relief surged, dread crept in behind it. Because showing the truth was only step one, the fallout of everything she had just seen, what it would mean for her loyalty, her shame in defending him all these years. I had no idea how deep that wound was about to cut. Shall I write the next chapter? My mother's hands trembled as she lowered the contract onto the coffee table, but her voice came out sharper than I had ever heard. Answer me. Did you sign her name? He shifted in his chair, posture stiffening, and then let out a practiced sigh, the kind that suggested, I can't believe we're even entertaining this nonsense. It was a formality. The office was dragging their feet. She would have lost the apartment without me stepping in. I did what needed to be done. Her eyes widened. So you admit it? Admit what? He leaned forward, palms up, a picture of false calm. That I made sure your daughter wasn't homeless? Yes, guilty as charged. You're welcome. The arrogance in his tone was unbearable. His words hung like poisoned smoke. I slammed the printed text messages down in front of him, the one where he said to, just focus on your job. My voice shook but didn't break. You weren't saving me. You were rewriting me. You wanted the world to think I couldn't survive without you. Even divorced, even out of our lives, you couldn't resist making yourself indispensable. He scoffed, but I saw his jaw clench. Listen to her, he sneered toward my mother, always twisting kindness into control, gratitude into suspicion. This is what I've dealt with for years. You wonder why she struggles. It's this mindset. And just like that, he tossed the spotlight back at me, expecting her to nod along like she always had. But this time, she didn't speak. She stared, not at me, but at the forged contract. Her lips pressed tight, her face tightened under the weight of undeniable proof. This isn't kindness, she whispered at last, her voice hoarse. This is forgery. This is stealing. For the first time, his mask cracked wide. Don't be dramatic. Do you have any idea how much damage she could do without guidance? The landlord trusts me. Everyone does. Would you rather I let her fail? His voice rose, louder, desperate, but the polished veneer was gone. The responsible adult routine had shattered. I felt my own body vibrating with the release I'd waited years for. You don't want me safe. You want me dependent. Because if I'm independent, your role ends. And you couldn't stand being irrelevant. His face hardened, the softness gone now, replaced by cold rage. He slapped a hand against the table, rattling the papers. You have no idea the mess you've just created. You think the world believes you? This little collection of papers won't keep you from screwing things up on your own. When the bills pile, when the landlord doubts you, don't call me. The silence after that was deafening. My mother's eyes watered, but her voice came unexpectedly steady. You need to leave. It was only 4 words, but in them was a tectonic shift. Her authority turned not against me, but against him. He froze, blinking like he wasn't sure he had heard right. When she repeated, louder this time, you need to leave. His lips parted in shock before curling angrily. Still, he had no choice. He grabbed his clipboard and stormed toward the door, muttering threats under his breath. When it slammed behind him, The house felt scraped raw, like a wound newly exposed to air. My mother sank into her chair, her shoulders caving, staring at the proofs. Everything she had defended for years lay in fragments on that table. The silence stretched until finally she whispered, "How many times did he do this to you? How much have I ignored?" Tears pricked my eyes, but I held them back. Enough that even leaving home wasn't enough. He tried to crawl into my freedom, too. Her face crumpled with shame, her hand covering her mouth. And yet I knew this wasn't the end. Now that his mask had been torn off, his retaliation would come. I could feel it already, like a storm gathering outside. The only question that mattered now was, how high a price would I pay for finally exposing the truth? Shall I write the next chapter? The price showed itself faster than I expected. The very next morning, before I even had the courage to check my phone, there was a sharp knock on my apartment door. Fast, insistent, and official sounding. When I opened it, a man in a suit stood there, holding a sealed envelope. "Delivery for my name," he said flatly, and handed it to me. My stomach dropped. The envelope carried a law firm's letterhead. I tore it open right there in the doorway. My eyes scanned the cold, clipped sentences. Notice of lease modification review. It claimed that changes were being investigated due to tenant disputes. The signature at the bottom? His lawyer's. He had beaten me to the draw. He wanted control of the narrative before I could even piece mine together. He knew exactly how to turn the fight into a legal labyrinth. My hands shook. He was trying to scare me out, to corner me into surrender. And worse, it meant the landlord was already involved now. The one person I needed to believe my side of the story was about to hear his version first, wrapped in the language of professionalism, not desperation. I stumbled inside and dialed my mother. When she answered, I didn't even say hello, just, "He's already weaponized lawyers against me." Her voice cracked. "He came last night after leaving my place. I thought—" Her words faltered. "I thought when I told him to leave, it was over." "It's never over with him," I whispered bitterly, clutching the letter hard until my knuckles blanched. "He doesn't quit when he loses in private. He regroups and strikes in public, where I'll look like the irrational one again." I could almost hear her crying softly into the receiver. "I let him run the story for too long. Nobody doubts him. And now you're carrying the punishment." Her guilt pressed heavy, but I couldn't shoulder hers on top of mine. "I don't need sorry," I said quietly. "I need you to stand with me when this goes to the landlord. I can't be the only voice saying the papers were forged. If it's just me, they'll crush me." There was a long pause. For years, she had sided with him. But finally, a soft relief washed through me when she answered, "I'll stand with you. We'll face them together." That gave me enough oxygen to keep going. That night, I gathered every scrap of proof into a binder. The forged lease, the utility reroute, the text screenshots, even my notes from the conversation where the receptionist hinted at call logs. For the first time, instead of feeling like a scared daughter, I felt like an investigator. He thought he could drown me in paper. But I had paper too. Still, the threat hung in the back of my skull. Men like him didn't lose gracefully. If he sensed his credibility slipping, what venom would he unleash next? And how much more damage could he do while the landlord weighed which version of me they believed? Everything now hinged on the meeting I knew was coming. My mother, the landlord, and him, together, in one room. And this time, either his empire of responsibility would collapse, or my reputation would, irreparably. Shall I write the next chapter?